As I'm sure you know, the war in Ukraine continues, and so does the humanitarian crisis caused by that war. My plea to you is to please, if you can, if you have the inclination and the means and the time, please go out there and find ways to help. There are lots and lots of organizations and funds and charities that are doing incredible and very important work trying to solve the humanitarian crisis. And I'm not going to list them all because there are far too many, and a lot of them are very location specific, and some of those might be local to you so that you can communicate with them more directly and more efficiently. There are organizations helping shelter Ukrainian refugees. If there are such organizations in your country, you can help directly by helping the refugees yourself as a volunteer. You can donate supplies, you can donate money. I just would really appreciate if you could help whichever way you can, because as a human being and as a Russian in particular, I really feel that that's the least I can do, is to keep speaking out about this and asking you to help. Thank you. They say that the only certainties in life are death and taxes. But in 2022, we could argue that there is a third certainty, that film prices will keep going up. Now, I'm not going to dive into speculations about whether or not the price hikes are justified by global economic situation, or if it's just film manufacturers getting greedy. No, you cannot make me. What I will talk about, though, are 5 tips for keeping your film photography costs in check. I employ these tips myself, and who knows, maybe you can make good use of them as well. Before we get to the first tip, a couple of important side notes. First, I primarily shoot black and white film, so naturally these tips will apply most fully to black and white film, although some of them will also work for color. Second, I aim to keep my approach to film photography result-driven, meaning that the single most important thing for me is the artistic and technical quality of the final image, be it a scan or a print. Of course, there are other factors that I care about as well, things like the excitement of seeking out and using different cameras and different lenses, curiosity about different films and development methods, different printing techniques, and so on and so forth, of course, not to mention all the artistic developments. But I see these factors as secondary, nice-to-haves rather than must-haves. Because if I give in to these secondary factors a bit too much, my approach quickly becomes experience-driven. It will prioritize the process over the result. And if that's how you approach film photography and it works for you, great, do not change a thing. But the 5 tips I'm about to share with you will make the most sense if your approach is somewhat similar to mine, if your approach is also result-driven. If you shoot film in different formats, perhaps you shoot some 35mm film and also some 120 film, as I do. Or maybe there is even some large format in the mix, 4x5, 5x7, 8x10, something exotic. Then my first advice would be to optimize your film choices based on the format. In simple terms, the larger the area of film that you expose, the less you need to enlarge or magnify that area to get a print of the same size or a scan of the same effective resolution and detail. So the larger the format, the less enlarged or magnified are the imperfections and flaws of a particular film. Which explains why there are actually very few films that truly impress me in 35mm. And yet, I haven't seen a film that does not look at least decent in medium format. Most of them actually look pretty darn good. And finally, I don't think there is a film that does not look outright gorgeous in 4x5 or larger. So based on that observation, I made a decision to go with more budget-friendly films in medium format, and then use the resulting savings to purchase sharper, finer-grained, and somewhat more expensive 35mm film. And if you shoot only 120 or large format, honestly, you can stick with the cheapest films you can find and not see that much of a difference in image quality. unless you make huge prints on the regular or require a specific quality from your film, like infrared sensitivity, for example. Now, I know this feeling very well. You are looking at a website of some major film retailer, they have all these exciting films in stock, and you've seen some stunning photography done on every single one of them. So of course, the logical thing to do is to buy one of each, right? Well, not if you want to keep the costs in check, because one of the easiest ways to save money on film is to buy the same film in larger quantities. The obvious solution for 35mm film is to buy large bulk rolls, usually 100-foot or 30.5-meter ones. Put them into bulk loaders and then spool the film into individual rolls yourself. Requires a little bit of practice at first, and you need to get a bulk loader, obviously, but it can save you quite a bit of cash in the long run. If you want to know how much exactly it can save you, divide the price of a bulk roll by about 17 or 18, which is a conservative estimate of how many 36 exposure rolls you can expect to spool from a 100-foot roll of bulk. Bulk roll of full... god damn it. Things are not quite so obvious in medium format, because bulk rolls for 120 are not really a thing, but at least in Europe, quite a few major film retailers will give you a lower price per roll if you buy 10 rolls of the same film or more. Fun fact, that's where this channel got its name. Really. Of course, no one film can really do everything, so you will probably end up with 2 or perhaps even 3 emulsions that you use for most of your photography, but even that will help. As a side note, settling on a particular film for a while will give you a chance to really understand that film, figure out the best ways to expose, develop, print or scan it to get the results you like. Result-driven approach for the win. The third one is a bit more complicated and maybe a tad controversial, so bear with me. Let's start with a quick thought exercise. I'm using Photo Impact's website as an example because they are probably the largest film retailer in Europe, and their pricing tends to be neither too greedy nor particularly charitable, so it is a good market sample as well. The cheapest 120 film we can find here is, unsurprisingly, Fomapan 100. €3.70 per roll if we buy 10 rolls of that film or more. See tip number 2. The most expensive / least frugal developer I could find here is Ilford DDX. If you only use the basic 1+4 dilution, that would mean 100 ml of concentrate mixed with 400 ml of water for a total of 500 ml of working solution, which is what you need to develop one roll of 120 film in standard Patterson tank. Yes, I know, there are other dilutions you can use with this developer, and also some folks seem to be getting good results with reusing 1+4 dilution for multiple rolls, but we are playing strictly by the book here. The 1 liter pack of DDX would allow us to develop 10 rolls of 120 film this way, and the pack costs €27.50. So we divide that by 10, and our price per roll in developer cost is €2.75. Now, let that sink in for a moment. The absolute cheapest fresh film is still nearly €1 per roll more expensive than even the most expensive developer used in the least frugal way possible. Maybe this is something you knew and realized all along. But for me, this really caused a bit of a mind shift. I suddenly realized that film is expensive, while developers are cheap. So my tip number 3 is cheap film, expensive developer. Unless you push, pun intended, your films to the limits of their abilities and latitude, the differences between some of the more famous, trendy, expensive films and their more budget-friendly counterparts can often be negated by a careful choice of developer. Sometimes a more expensive, more specialized, and perhaps less frugal developer than you might usually consider. And more often than not, the combined film plus developer cost per roll will still be lower compared to the more expensive films developed in mainstream developers. Coarser grain can be helped by using a staining developer like PMK or a fine grain one like Perceptol. Somewhat lower effective film speed can to some extent be remedied by using microfan or diafine. You want sharpness? See what a cheap film can do in something like FX39. And the developers I mentioned aren't even the most sophisticated and effective solutions for those issues. They're simply the ones that are more widely known and are thus easier to find. Of course, if you regularly push film by multiple stops or require a particular characteristic from your film, like extended infrared sensitivity or skin-cutting sharpness and resolution, then this tip won't make quite as much sense. But otherwise, give it a think and do some math per roll. You might be surprised. Not a film buying tip per se, but something to consider nonetheless. Next only to the idiot behind the camera, this guy. Faulty equipment is by far the biggest cause for wasting precious film. Faulty cameras waste film. So do faulty lenses. So do light meters with dubious accuracy. And sure, servicing or replacing something with a working unit can be quite costly. But in many cases, that's something you only need to do once every few years, maybe even a decade. The amount of film and chemistry you would have wasted with the faulty equipment during that period is likely to cost not that much less. And of course, that does not include the cost you'd pay in frustration and disappointment. Whew, okay. Everyone recovered from seeing the D word? Good, because you're about to hear some more of it. Now, I love shooting film, but it certainly has its limits, and knowing those limits will save you a great deal of energy, frustration, and quite a bit of money even. The light is so dim that the meter tells you to push the film to ISO 12,000? Time to shoot digital. Want accurate color under tungsten lights, but only have a daylight balanced color film on you and no correction filters? Time to shoot digital. Digital can also be really helpful in preparation. Maybe you have an artistic idea that is potentially really interesting but completely untested and highly experimental. Try it on digital first. Setting up lights for a studio shoot in a setup you haven't used before? Take some trial shots on digital. Not sure about the landscape composition or how accurate your meter is? Take a quick phone shot. Ansel Adams used Polaroids for exposure and composition proofing, but I think he would happily use digital cameras and smartphones for the same purpose. Remember, digital is your enemy only if you think of it that way, because otherwise, it can be one of the most useful tools in a film shooter's camera bag. That's it, folks. Hope you enjoyed these 5 tips, and if you did, give this video a like, share down in the comments what you think. Maybe there are tips of your own that you would like to share with fellow film photographers. Let me know if there's something you didn't agree with, and let's have a conversation about it, as civilized people do. And if you want to see more content like this, give this channel a subscribe. Give this channel a subscribe, God. Anyways, see you next time.